it's Penny here, and today we're going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2022. Of course, this is subjective. Some of these might be books that you actually liked, but I really did not. One good thing about these books is that I don't own any of these. Luckily, I read all of these through the library. Thanks, library. Or maybe not so thanks, because maybe if the library hadn't had these books, I might not have read some of them at all. But anyway, let's get into the books. I kind of have 10 slots, and I've put them in order, but the order could probably change on a different day. And I've put 3 books into the 10th spot because I couldn't cut things down. So the 3 books in that 10th slot are all books from series I was reading, and all later books from those series where I started out liking the series, but by the time we got to the last ones, I wasn't having a good time. So firstly, we've got Changes, the 12th book in the Dresden Files. I did actually read the 13th book, Ghost Story, as well, because I was still hoping that it would get better. It didn't get better. The Dresden Files, if you haven't heard me rant about it before, is about this man named Harry Dresden, who is a wizard as well as a private investigator, and he's stuck in the middle of this war between the vampires and the Wizards Council. The Fae are also interfering. Unfortunately, he's a chauvinistic dick and terrible with women and just very annoying all the time. To make things worse, the 12th book, Changes, goes in a completely different direction, does it in the most boring way possible. Like, it had a good setup, and it actually had a good ending as well, which is why I read another book after that. But the whole middle, nothing was happening. And I still hate Harry. Like, everything he did in that 12th book, ridiculous. So while there were some books in the series that I enjoyed, overall, it was the 12th and 13th book that made me decide not to continue, even though I think there's 17 books out so far and it is going to continue, maybe if Jim Butcher ever gets there. But I'm out. Dresden makes it onto the worst books of the year. Then another series that I really ended up not enjoying was the Skullduggery Pleasant series. This is a middle grade young adult type series about this young girl who gets involved in the supernatural, and the skeleton detective Skullduggery Pleasant is her mentor. There's also a prophecy that we are building up to through the whole series, and I was waiting to see what would happen with that, and I was so disappointed with it. The last couple of books are so expansive and there's so many different perspectives, and honestly, I didn't care about most of them, so I was incredibly bored. I just feel like the first books were so humorous and fast-paced and had really clever plots, and I really enjoyed the first books in the series, but by the last ones, I was so over it. And I had thought that maybe I would continue on to other books that he's written following some of the characters later on. But more and more, I just feel like the last books in that series and probably the next series were just written because he needed books to sell rather than because the story was good. I know a lot of people love this series, so I don't know. But for me, I was really disappointed in the ending. Then as well, finally, probably the most controversial one on here is Lord of Chaos. I don't even know, the 5th book in the Wheel of Time series. I think I read the first 7 books of the Wheel of Time series, and honestly, I'm planning to continue because I'm not very smart. And I'm still just hopeful that the series gets better. I'm hoping that the last books, where Brandon Sanderson wrote them, will be better. I don't know what that hope is based on. The Wheel of Time, again, a very popular series, so we're following a bunch of young people who get involved in this prophecy in this world where time is kind of circular and the same events happen over and over again, and these boys are key figures within that circular story that's going on. There's some amazing concepts in Wheel of Time, but the actual story is so slow, and I liked the first book. By the time we got to the 5th book, I was not having a good time. The next 2 books, I've read them, but do I even know what happened? I feel like nothing happened. But so many people love this series that something must have happened, but I just could not pay attention because I could not bring myself to care. All the characters that were such genuine, nice people in the beginning have turned into like manipulative fuckboys that I just don't care about. And I don't know. Like, there's things in the series that are great. I'm gonna continue, but I really don't know that these books deserve the hype. Or at least they're not the kind of books that I like. Or at least, so far, I'm not having a great time with The Wheel of Time. I kind of wish someone would convince me to DNF them, but I don't think the completionist in me can let go of this, even though I have let go of the rest of the Dresden Files, so I'm making progress on DNFing things. We'll see. I am going to try in this new year to read the rest of the books physically rather than the audiobook, because I did read the first book in the series physically and I did enjoy that one, so maybe it's just the audiobooks are no good. I don't know. We're going to try. So, those are all kind of popular series where the endings were some of the worst books I've read during the year. Now let's get into the 9th book on the list, which is actually also a book from a series. So we've got Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is the 3rd book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series. So this is a series where there is a cafe where if you sit in a particular seat at a particular time while you drink your coffee, you're able to go back in time. However, you can't get up from your seat and you have to come back before your coffee gets cold. As well, while you're back in time, you can't actually change anything. And the first book in the series was beautiful. I loved the way that it wrote these really emotional stories and showed how going back in time, even though these people weren't able to change anything in the past, the experience they had traveling back in time still changed the future. The first story is amazing. Like, these books are kind of written as a series of short stories. So I think there's 4 short stories generally in each book. First book, amazing. The second book, Tales from the Cafe, not as great. Before Your Memory Fades, honestly, I was bored for most of it and it was a real struggle to get through. So, I do recommend Before the Coffee Gets Cold, but possibly consider treating it as a standalone and don't bother with the other books that follow on from it. Then number 8 on the list is So Happy For You by Celia Lasky. This is a book about a woman who doesn't believe in marriage, but she does agree to be the maid of honor for her friend. To be honest, worst friendship I've read in a long time. And it's kind of set in this semi-dystopian world where people are very over the top about marriage. The only thing I would say with this is, to me, it didn't seem that different from our actual reality. Now, admittedly, we do live in a dystopian, so I guess it is a dystopian. But I feel like if it was going to try and make things dystopian, it needed to take it further than it did. And in the end, I just didn't really know what this book wanted to be. It wasn't really a thriller. It wasn't really a dystopian. It wasn't really a contemporary looking into the theme of marriage, although it had a lot of thoughts included in it about marriage because our main perspective doesn't believe in marriage, and so we get a lot of her perspective. But honestly, even though I agreed with so many of the thoughts of this main character, her reasoning for her beliefs and her explanations of her beliefs and the way that she acted based on those beliefs really made me annoyed. So I was just very disappointed in this book. I didn't have a good time reading it at all. Then number 7 is The Wife Between Us, and to be honest, I can barely remember this book, but I do remember that when I read it, I was really annoyed. So this, I think, is a story about a woman who is a polygamist and her husband calls his wives like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday because of the days he spends with them. I think the main character's name is like Tuesday or something. But this is one of these thrillers that leans very heavily on the idea of an unreliable narrator to the point where you can't actually know if anything that's happening is actually happening. And at that point, I stopped caring, because if none of this is happening, even like fictionally happening, then why do I care about any of it? And when I read a thriller, one of the things I like is the mystery part of a thriller. Like, I like the thrillingness. There wasn't a lot of that from what I remember. But I also really like the mystery. But if the narrator is so unreliable that you can't trust anything that's happening, how can you work out the mystery? Honestly, I just was really annoyed with the whole thing. I kind of wish I hadn't read it. I think that's true for every book on this list. And then we've got number 6. This one is really sad because it's a book that I was really expecting to love. So we've got Upgrade by Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch wrote Dark Matter and Recursion, which are both really twisty time travel books that I really loved. I thought the ideas were really great and the stories were relatively thrilling. Like, not thrillers, but like, they were exciting. There were some twists and turns at the end. And so, having loved those books, I had very high expectations for Upgrade. And I was a little bit nervous because this one isn't a time travel one. This is a genetic modification story. So we've got this man whose mother was a genius at genetic modification. Unfortunately, something went wrong and his mother made quite a big mistake, which led to genetic modification becoming essentially illegal, very locked down, but there's a lot of underground genetic modification going on. And this man has become like a police officer or FBI kind of guy going around investigating people who are doing illegal genetic modification. Something happens and he ends up being modified himself and like starting to change in particular ways. But firstly, the main character was incredibly boring. None of the things that happened to him were very believable to me, including one of the key changes that the whole plot kind of relies upon is this idea that his memory is now perfect. He can remember everything that's ever happened to him perfectly, including all the things before he was modified. And I don't think that's possible, so I wasn't able to suspend my disbelief. This kind of science fiction book, like I don't expect everything to be realistic, but I expect it to be realistic enough. And to me, most of what's happening wasn't realistic. Also, most of what's happening wasn't very interesting. The twist at the end was incredibly boring. There was also a bit of action at the end, also very boring. I was so bored and so disappointed because I really was hoping to love this one. Now, number 5 is one of the 2 books on this list that I DNF'd. The other DNF is the one in first place. But this one, I did listen to a third of the audiobook, and technically this book was initially released in 3 parts, so I think I read the first part. The book I'm talking about is 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I've read some Haruki Murakami books before that I really loved. I really liked The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle and also After Dark. I really liked both of those. Maybe there were a few bits in them that I was a little bit unhappy with. Things that were like a little bit sexually weird, but generally I liked those 2. Kafka on the Shore is Haruki Murakami's big book that most people rave about. Really, I didn't like that one at all. But I thought I would read 1Q84 just to see maybe which way I was leaning overall. And unfortunately, I'm now leaning on the side of I'm never going to read anything by Haruki Murakami again. And it's not just the weird sex stuff, of which there was some in this book. It's not just the creepy guys like talking about a young teenage girl's chest all the time. It's not that. It's just that it was so boring and nothing was happening and I just didn't care. And maybe it would have got interesting, but I couldn't make myself keep listening to find out if that was actually going to happen. I really like when Haruki Murakami gets really strange. Not this weird sexual stuff, but the other stuff. And when he has like these really abstract ideas. Like there's a part in the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle where our main character is down the bottom of a well, just kind of like hallucinating and thinking strange thoughts. Loved it. And you might think the main character just being down the bottom of a well for a couple of chapters would be boring. But do you know what? The romance that was building up in 1Q84 was so much more boring than a man sitting at the bottom of a well. Or at least to me it was. I've read some other people's reviews saying that they felt like the characters in this one were so much more easy to relate to than characters in other Murakami books. I felt the complete opposite. I don't care about either of these characters. I feel like my views on romance are like the complete opposite of Haruki Murakami. It was some kind of like fate thing, I think, that was being built up. And just, well, I went into this book expecting that it would be in some way related to 1984, George Orwell's book. It is set in 1984, and there is mention of George Orwell's book, but the connection was very weak, and I didn't care. Also, I should have remembered, actually, 1984, well, I really enjoyed the setup. There's a massive part in 1984 that I didn't like either, so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that I didn't like this one. Okay, then we've got number 4. This one could go higher on the list, but there's a couple of books by the same author that I wanted to put together, so I put them above this. But number 4 on the list is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. So this is the second book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J Maas, the first one being House of Earth and Blood. I have not always loved everything by Sarah J Maas that I've read. I didn't mind the Throne of Glass series, even though it got a bit ridiculous as it went on. I didn't really care for the Court of Thorns and Roses series. But House of Earth and Blood was kind of her first proper adult fantasy, and I thought the world building was amazing. I actually really liked the murder mystery that's involved, and the main character and the main romance were something that I was engaged in. I enjoyed House of Earth and Blood, and I was very surprised by it. And I reread it before I read House of Sky and Breath to double check whether I actually liked it. And I still really liked it. But then House of Sky and Breath was so disappointing. The plot was just all over the place. All the development of the romance and the main character were just like thrown in the bin. Nothing was really progressed. So much of what's happening didn't seem important. There was just no focus. And like, just every romance is ridiculous. The sex scenes, the worst. I was really hoping that I would like it. I'm not particularly surprised that I didn't, but I was really hoping I would. So it's such a shame. Oh, and something happens at the end of that book that kind of sets something up that I'm 100% not interested in. I can see why other fans of Sarah J Maas would be like, wow, that makes me even more interested in this series. But for me, who didn't particularly like certain things in her other books, what a disappointment. I'm not interested in that at all. Okay, then number 2 and number 3 are by the same author. Number 3 is Seasonal Fares by Seanan McGuire. This is the sequel to Middle Game, which I loved, and once again, I reread it to see if I loved it, and I loved Middle Game just as much on a reread. So I had big hopes for Seasonal Fares. Middle Game follows these 2 characters who are basically the personification of maths and language that have been created by alchemists to try and create gods. But it's more about kind of their personal journey being forced into these godlike roles. Seasonal Fares is kind of not a sequel, it's more of a companion story, but at the same time it was written like a sequel in a lot of ways, because we do get a lot of the characters from Middle Game, which I thought I wanted, but when I got it, I didn't want it. As well, we're mainly following these 2 characters, a couple who are the representation of summer and winter, and basically this trial that they have to go through to become the summer and winter ahead of the other people who are potentially candidates to become summer and winter. But everything that we got in Middle Game, where it was so conceptually interesting and such an interesting analysis of characters and like everything that makes people who they are throughout their life, like that was so interesting in Middle Game. But Seasonal Fares just felt like it was rambling all over the place with no real plot or focus or point, and the ending was completely unsatisfying and just what a waste of time. And again, a book that I was super excited for. I really thought I was going to love it, but I didn't. And then number 2 is also Middle Game related, so it was Along the Saltways Sea by A. Deborah Baker. So in Middle Game, there is an alchemist who writes these middle grade books in order to get these concepts and ideas kind of indoctrinated into society so that then alchemy can be built upon these beliefs. So it's kind of like middle grade books that enable certain alchemy to work. And then Seanan McGuire went and wrote these books from the perspective, like, so A. Deborah Baker is the name of the character in Middle Game. What a great, amazing idea to take these books and make them a real thing. The first book in that series, Over the Woodward Wall, I did really like. We've got Zib and Avery. Zib's this girl with kind of like chaotic energy. Avery's much more like refined and strictly following the rules. And they find themselves in the Up and Over, where they have to go on a bit of a quest to try and get back home. In Along the Saltways Sea, They are still trying to find their way along the improbable road to the impossible city, I think. Like so many good ideas set up in the first book, and then the second book, what was even happening? We're just mucking around. So much of what was being said didn't even make any sense, and maybe I missed the metaphors, maybe I didn't understand it, but if these are meant to be middle grade books, I feel like they should still have somewhat of a plot that's interesting to middle grade children, and I didn't think it was interesting. To be honest, I did read this a long time ago, so this was the first book I read in the year. I was so excited to read it, and it was the biggest disappointment. And I'm really sad because there are going to be more books in that series, but can I read them? I don't know, because I hated this one so much. And I can't even trust other people's reviews, because while for Seasonal Fears, a lot of other people I've seen didn't enjoy it. So that's good. I can trust people's reviews on that series. But for Along the Saltways Sea, I actually saw a lot of people giving it good reviews. So I don't know, did I miss something? But if the next book comes out and everyone gives it good reviews, like that doesn't mean that I'm going to like it. So I don't know. I'm so disappointed. Anyway, that brings us to number 1, the worst book that I read in the year, and that would go to The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay. Now, admittedly, I didn't read all of this, I DNF'd it, but I was within 100 pages of the end. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't keep reading it. It was so boring. Nothing had happened. I had read like 250 pages and nothing had happened. We're following this boy, mediocre, normal, white guy. Admittedly, he does have a disability, but that wasn't really explored in an interesting way, in my opinion. It was more focusing just on this guy and his friendship with this girl. That was really boring, but he tried to make it like really meaningful. And the whole point of the story is that he is making hints that this girl is a vampire and that his medical issues are somehow related to the fact that she is a vampire. Very vague hints. And then she is making annotations throughout this memoir that he's written, basically questioning the way that he's remembering things. And it sounded really creative and interesting, but no, even her annotations were incredibly boring. I just kept thinking she was going to say something interesting, or like she was going to be refuting that she was a vampire, but maybe it was obvious that she actually was a vampire. But honestly, it was obvious that nothing was happening. Just a boring guy having a boring life, writing a pretentious memoir, and then some boring comments from a boring person about that memoir. I just really hated this book. And I read the 5-star reviews for this book to try and see what it was that people liked about it. And I don't feel like they were reading the same book as me, because they were like, oh, such an amazing analysis of friendship. But like, was it? Were they even friends? I am so sad that I wasted any time reading that book. I feel like all the time I put into that book was a waste. Most of the time, even when I don't like books, I feel like it's okay. They could have been worth it, so I don't mind that I tried reading them. And maybe it's because I DNF'd it, but I just feel like every moment I spent reading that book was unenjoyable and I shouldn't have done it. So annoying. Anyway, those are the worst books that I read in 2022. Let me know if you've read any of them, and if you did, do you agree that they were bad, or did you actually like them? Maybe we'll have a fight in the comments. Also, let me know what some of the worst books you read were during the year. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.